Who are you saving the other half for, old man? The diner went dead silent. Leonard Grayson froze napkin halfway around a piece of cold chicken fried steak, hands trembling, eyes suddenly wet with something he hadn't let anyone see in years. He didn't answer right away, and that pause, that 3-second pause, said everything a man's pride had spent months trying to hide. If you've ever loved someone more than you loved yourself, this story will break you wide open. Subscribe to this channel right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The bell above the diner door didn't ring so much as it wheezed a tired little sound, barely a sound at all, like it had given up trying to announce anything important a long time ago. But Donna Perlmutter, who had been waitressing at the Dusty Fork Diner for going on 19 years, always heard it. Didn't matter if she was elbow deep in dishes or arguing with the cook about the biscuit recipe. She always heard that bell. And on Tuesday and Friday mornings, when she heard it and looked up, she already knew who she'd see. Leonard Grayson. Same faded flannel jacket, same careful shuffle, same way of pulling out the second stool from the counter. Never the first, never the third, like that particular stool was the one thing left in the world that still made sense to him. Morning, Leonard, she'd say. Morning, Donna. His voice had that quality that old men's voices get, not weak exactly, but worn smooth like Riverstone. Like it had been used hard for decades and was now just coasting. He never looked at the menu, hadn't looked at it in 3 years. Chicken fried steak, he'd say. Mashed potatoes, black coffee, please. Always the please. Even when his hands were shaking so bad the coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Even on the mornings when Donna could tell he hadn't slept. Always the please. Donna would put the order in, pour his coffee, and go about her business. And then Leonard Grayson would do the thing that had been quietly haunting her for months. He'd eat exactly half his plate, not approximately half, not most of it, exactly half, like he'd drawn an invisible line straight down the middle of the oval plate and made himself a rule he wasn't allowed to break. He ate slowly, deliberately, the way a man eats when he's made a decision about something and is sticking to it out of sheer stubbornness. And when he reached that invisible line, that unmistakable halfway point, where the mashed potatoes ran out on one side and the remaining piece of steak sat cooling on the other, he'd stop. Set his fork down, pull 3 or 4 paper napkins from the dispenser, and carefully, almost tenderly, wrap the rest of the food up. Tuck it into the inside pocket of that flannel jacket. Leave exact change on the counter. He never let Donna bring a check, never let her get close enough to ask questions, and walk out. Donna had been telling herself it was none of her business for 3 months. She wasn't telling herself that anymore. The first time Ryder Callahan walked into the Dusty Fork, 2 of the regular breakfast crowd actually got up and left. That wasn't unusual. When you were 6'3", weighed 230, had a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than bone, and wore a leather vest with a patch on the back that made people instinctively remember somewhere else they needed to be. People cleared space for you without being asked. Ghost, that was what everyone in the chapter called him, had called him for 15 years. And the reason for it wasn't something he advertised. Ghost didn't take offense at people moving away. He preferred it most days. He was a man who liked room to breathe. He came to the Dusty Fork because it was off the highway, it was cheap, and because Donna Perlmutter made the kind of black coffee that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen, which was the only soft memory he'd kept from childhood and the only one he bothered protecting. He'd been coming every few weeks for about 2 months, and he'd noticed Leonard on the second visit. Hard not to notice a man who wraps his leftovers in napkins and tucks them inside his jacket. Ghost was a man who'd learned through 15 years of riding with one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in the country, through 2 stints in county, through a decade of watching men fall apart in ways that society pretended didn't happen. He'd learned how to read people, not in some mystical way, just in the way that anyone learns when survival sometimes depends on knowing fast whether a man is scared or dangerous, broken or dangerous, lying, or just protecting something. He watched Leonard for 3 visits before he made any conclusions. By the 4th visit, he was sure. The old man wasn't stealing the food. He wasn't hoarding out of habit or mental illness. He wasn't confused. He was saving it for someone who mattered to him more than he mattered to himself. Ghost knew that look. He'd seen it before in veterans and fathers who'd lost jobs, and mothers working 2 shifts who ate standing up over the sink so their kids could have the chair. It was a specific kind of love, the kind that disguises itself as practicality, the kind that never announces itself because announcing it would make the other person feel like a burden. Ghost hated that kind of suffering, not because it was dramatic, because it was so goddamn quiet. It was a Tuesday in November when he finally said something. The temperature outside had dropped to 22 degrees overnight, and the Dusty Forks heating system was putting up what could generously be called a valiant effort. Donna had set a space heater behind the counter that made one side of the diner warm and left the other side feeling like November had walked in and taken a seat. Leonard was at the counter. Ghost was in the corner booth big enough to fit him angled, so his back was never to a door. Old habit never broke it. He watched Leonard eat. Methodical, slow. Exactly half the chicken fried steak. A precise portion of the mashed potatoes. 3 careful sips of coffee like he was rationing that too. Then the fork went down. Then the napkins came out. And Ghost felt something he didn't have a great name for. It wasn't pity. He hated pity. Pity was useless. It was something sharper. Something closer to anger, but not at Leonard. At whatever situation had brought a man who said please to a waitress and ate half his breakfast. To this particular moment in a cold diner in November. He stood up before he had fully decided to. His boots were loud on the linoleum, and 3 people looked up and Leonard's shoulders went stiff. The stiffness of a small animal that's heard something big moving nearby. Ghost put his hand on the stool beside Leonard. Mine, he said. Leonard looked at him, just looked at him, at the size of him, at the vest, at the scar that ran from Ghost's left ear to the corner of his jaw. The old man's throat moved. Free country, soil, Leonard said. Ghost sat down. He didn't say anything right away. He caught Donna's eye and pointed at his coffee cup, and she came over and refilled both their cups without being asked, which was one of the things Ghost appreciated about her. Leonard wrapped the food carefully. Ghost watched him fold the napkins, watched the practiced efficiency of it. This was not the first time. This was a ritual worn smooth by repetition. Leonard tucked the packet inside his jacket, and Ghost said it. Who are you saving the other half for, old man? The diner went quiet, not completely quiet. The space heater hummed. The coffee maker clicked, but the human noise dropped out. Donna behind the counter went very still. Leonard's hand stopped moving. He didn't look at Ghost. He looked down at the counter, at his coffee cup, at the space his plate had been. His jaw worked like he was chewing on the answer, trying to decide which version of it to give. That's a personal question, Leonard said finally. Yeah, Ghost said. It is. He didn't apologize, didn't soften it, just waited. And something about that, the waiting without apology, the directness without aggression, seemed to reach Leonard in a way that more polite approaches might not have. The old man exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that's been held for a while. My granddaughter, Leonard said. His voice was barely above the hum of the space heater. She's 13. She doesn't always tell me when she's hungry. She's got too much of her mother in her, too much pride. A pause, so I bring her what I can. Ghost looked at him. You bring her cold chicken fried steak wrapped in diner napkins. Leonard's chin came up slightly, the defensive reflex of a man who's been questioned on something he knows looks bad but has decided anyway. She doesn't complain. How often does she go hungry? Silence. Leonard. I didn't ask your name, the old man said quietly. Ryder. People call me Ghost. He held out his hand. Leonard looked at it for a moment, then shook it a firm handshake. The handshake of a man who'd been taught that you grip and you mean it, regardless of what else might be falling apart. Leonard Grayson. How often, Leonard? Another long pause. Leonard turned his coffee cup in his hand slowly like he was reading something in the bottom of it. Often enough, he said. Ghost didn't push harder right then. He knew when to push and when to let silence do the work. He'd learned that from a man named Deke who'd ridden with him for 11 years before a truck on I-40 ended. That Deke used to say that silence was the most underrated tool in any conversation, that most men were so uncomfortable with it, they'd fill it with the exact truth you were looking for. Leonard filled it, not all at once, not in a straight line, but over the next 20 minutes while the diner slowly came back to life around them. And Donna refilled their cups twice more. Leonard Grayson told Ryder Callahan the shape of his life. His daughter Clara Ellie's mother had fought addiction for a decade. She wasn't a bad person, Leonard said, And the way he said it made clear he'd said that sentence many times to many people defending her. She got in with people, and then she got in with something stronger than people, and she couldn't find her way back. Clara had died 18 months ago. Fentanyl, which was the answer to that particular sentence that Leonard didn't say out loud because it didn't need saying anymore. It was everywhere. It was in everything. It was the word that came after too many names now. Ellie's father was a man named Derek, who had been minimally present at the best of times and had vanished entirely when Clara died, which was a specific kind of cowardice that Leonard spoke about without heat, as though he'd processed his anger about it and found the place on the other side where it just became a fact. So it's just you and her, Ghost said. Just me and her. How old are you, Leonard? 71. Ghost looked at him. You worked on much 42 years in an oil refinery. Leonard held up his hands and Ghost looked at them, not the tremor, but underneath it the shape of the hands themselves. Big hands, hands that had carried and lifted and turned and gripped for 4 decades. My lungs gave out about 6 years ago. Occupational thing. I get a pension. A small, almost bitter smile. Small one. How much? Leonard glanced at him, the look of a man who's been raised not to discuss money with strangers. Enough to cover the rent, Ghost said, making it a question without making it a question. Some months, Leonard said, and food. Some months, Leonard said again. Ghost was quiet for a moment. She know, he asked. Ellie, does she know how tight it is? And this was the moment. This was where Leonard's face changed, where the careful, controlled, I can handle this expression cracked just enough to show what was underneath it. No, he said, quietly, firmly, almost fiercely, and I need it to stay that way. She's 13 years old. She's already lost more than any kid should lose. She doesn't need to know that her grandfather is... He stopped, pressed his lips together. She thinks I'm not hungry in the mornings. She thinks I eat here and I'm full. I don't correct her. Ghost looked at him for a long moment. So you eat half your breakfast so you can bring her the rest. She eats better when she doesn't know she's eating better. If I bought her a meal outright, she'd feel like a burden. Leonard shook his head. She's a proud kid, gets it honest. The corner of Ghost's mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, the acknowledgement of something. I need you to not tell anyone, Leonard said. His voice had a different quality now, not the worn, smooth Riverstone voice of an old man in the morning. Something harder, something with an edge. I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking for anything. You asked and I told you, and I need you to. I'm not going to broadcast your business, Ghost said. I'm not a gossip. I don't know what you are, Leonard said honestly. Fair, Ghost said. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm going to pay for your breakfast, Ghost said. I'm not asking. Ghost's voice was even, not aggressive, just certain in the way that some men's voices get when they have made a decision and the decision is final. And I'm going to buy one to go, whatever she likes. Leonard's jaw worked. Pancakes, he said finally, almost a whisper. She likes pancakes. They're more expensive. I usually can't. Donna, Ghost said, not loudly. Donna, who had absolutely been listening while pretending to wipe down the counter, looked up with the expression of someone caught but not ashamed of it. Can you put in a short stack to go extra butter? Extra syrup on the side. Donna looked at Leonard, and Leonard looked at his coffee cup, and Donna said, Of course, coming right up. Leonard didn't say thank you. He couldn't quite get there, not yet, not with this much pride in the room with them. But his hands, which had been restless on the counter, went still. And that was enough. Ghost paid and left before Leonard did. He didn't drag it out. He didn't make it a moment. He left 2 20s on the counter far too much, which Donna would figure out what to do with, and he put on his jacket and he walked out. He sat on his bike in the parking lot for a minute. The cold was significant. His breath made clouds. He thought about a 13-year-old girl eating cold chicken fried steak wrapped in paper napkins and believing her grandfather wasn't hungry. He thought about a 71-year-old man with bad lungs and trembling hands drawing an invisible line down the middle of his plate every Tuesday and Friday morning and holding that line the way some men hold a religious vow. He thought about pride, about the specific violence of it, how it could be the thing that kept you standing and the thing that kept you from asking for the hand that would help you stand. He started his bike. He didn't have a plan yet. But something had shifted in him, quiet and certain, the way the temperature drops before snow. Not a decision exactly, more like a direction. He rode out onto the highway. The road opened up ahead of him, empty and gray under the November sky. He'd find out more. That was the first step. He'd find out exactly what Leonard Grayson was up against, and then he'd figure out what, if anything, could be done about it. It wasn't his business. He knew that. He'd never let that stop him before. It's hard. What he found out over the next 72 hours was worse than he'd expected. And Ghost was a man who had learned to expect things to be worse than they looked. He had people not in a sinister way, just in the way that a man who'd spent 15 years in a tight-knit organization develops a network, whether he intends to or not. He knew a woman named Patrice who worked at the county assessor's office and owed him a favor from a situation 2 years ago involving her nephew and a bad decision about a car that wasn't his. He knew a man named Curtis who drove for a local delivery company and knew every address and every landlord in the county the way a man who delivers things always does. He knew a retired journalist named Hal who spent his days monitoring property records online because he had nothing else to do and had made it essentially his hobby. Between the three of them, over 72 hours, a picture came together. The Sunrise Estates Mobile Home Park, which was the official name of the collapsing trailer community 3 miles outside of Tulsa, where Leonard and Ellie lived, had changed hands 8 weeks ago. The previous owner had been a local man named Frank Dassler, who'd owned the park for 20 years, and who, while not exactly generous, had at least been present in the sense that he lived in the area, answered his phone, and fixed things when they broke badly enough. The new owner was a man named Vincent Mercer. Ghost asked Hal about Vincent Mercer. Hal sent back a file that took Ghost 45 minutes to read and left him sitting very still at his kitchen table with a specific feeling in his chest that he recognized as controlled fury. Vincent Mercer was 47 years old. He'd made his first significant money in commercial real estate in Dallas in the early 2000s, had expanded into Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri over the past decade, and had developed a very specific business model that he'd never been shy about because it was technically legal, and the people it hurt were rarely in a position to fight back. He bought distressed mobile home parks. He raised rents. He reduced maintenance. He waited. And then when the residents who were almost uniformly elderly or low income or both fell behind on payments, he evicted them and redeveloped the land for higher density housing or commercial property. He'd done it 11 times in 4 states. He'd been sued 7 times. He'd settled 6 and won 1. He'd never stopped. Sunrise Estates was, according to documents Patrice had quietly passed along, currently in what Mercer's company called a transition phase. Rents had already been raised once a letter had gone out 6 weeks ago after the sale, informing residents of a 30% increase effective the 1st of December, which was in 12 days. Leonard's pension couldn't cover the new rent, not even close. And according to Curtis, who had a friend who delivered mail in the area, notices had already started going out. Formal eviction notices. 3 months of back rent demanded in full within 30 days or vacate the premises. Leonard hadn't mentioned the letter. Ghost thought about that. The old man had been sitting in that diner eating half his breakfast and talking about his granddaughter's pride, and he had a formal eviction notice sitting somewhere in that collapsing trailer, and he hadn't mentioned it. Because he was handling it. He was always handling it, right up until he wasn't, and by then there'd be nowhere left to go. Ghost sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called a man named Big Eddie, who was the road captain of the chapter, and who answered the phone with, "This better be worth interrupting Monday Night Football for Ghost." "It's worth it," Ghost said, and he started talking. He went back to the diner on Friday. Leonard was already at the counter when Ghost walked in. Same stool, same flannel jacket. The posture was slightly different, something tighter around the shoulders, something that Ghost, now that he knew what he knew, read as a man carrying a weight he hadn't been carrying 2 weeks ago. Or rather, carrying a weight he'd been carrying longer, but that had gotten heavier. Ghost sat down beside him. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Leonard glanced at him, and there was something in the glance, something complicated, not quite wariness, not quite relief, the complicated expression of a man who had told a stranger something true and wasn't entirely sure yet whether that had been a mistake. "How's Ellie?" Ghost said. The old man's face did something small and involuntary, a softening around the eyes. She's good. A pause. She talked about pancakes for 2 days, wanted to know where they came from. I told her a friend. He looked at Ghost sideways. Seems I have one now. Seems that way, Ghost said. Donna brought Ghost coffee without being asked. They sat for a moment, then Ghost said, I know about the letter, Leonard. The stillness that moved through Leonard Grayson was total, the kind that comes before a response that needs to be chosen carefully. Don't know what you're referring to, he said. Yeah, you do. A long pause. That's my business, Leonard said. I know. I'm handling it. I know you believe that. Leonard looked at him, then really looked at him with those eyes that had seen 42 years in a refinery and the death of his daughter and the abandonment of a man who should have stayed and still somehow got up every Tuesday and Friday morning and ate exactly half his breakfast because there was a 13-year-old girl who liked pancakes and was too proud to say she was hungry. What do you want from me? Leonard asked. Nothing, Ghost said. Men like you don't sit down and buy breakfast for nothing. Men like me, Ghost repeated. You know what I mean. Ghost wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I know what you think you mean, he said. But let me tell you what I actually want. I want to make sure that girl doesn't end up in a shelter in December. I want to make sure a man who worked 42 years and said please to waitresses his whole life doesn't get thrown out of his home by some developer who sees a number on a spreadsheet where a person ought to be. He paused. That's what I want. You can take that or leave it. Leonard was quiet for a long time. The space heater hummed. The coffee maker clicked. Outside, a truck rolled past on the highway, its engine fading. She'd be so ashamed, Leonard said quietly. If she knew how close we are to... He stopped. His throat worked. I've been protecting her from that since the beginning. She doesn't know what almost happened in Twice last year. She doesn't know about the letters. She thinks we're fine. We're just a little careful, is all. That's what she thinks. And you want to keep it that way, Ghost said. She's 13 years old. She's already carrying so much. Her mother, her father disappearing, moving in here with me. She's trying so hard to be good, to not be trouble, to not... Leonard's voice broke. Just slightly. Just for a second. He pressed his lips together and recomposed himself. She's a child. She should get to be a child. Ghost nodded. Then let me do what I do, Ghost said, without telling her why. Leonard looked at him. Trust me the same way she trusts you, Ghost said, just for a little while. It was the right thing to say. Ghost didn't know in that moment whether he'd said it because it was strategically correct or because he meant it. Maybe both. Maybe with time, those things had become the same. Leonard Grayson looked at him for a long time. Then he looked down at his plate. He picked up his fork. And for the first time in as long as Donna could remember, he ate past the halfway point. He wasn't all the way there yet, but he was moving. And sometimes that's where everything begins. The call Ghost made to Big Eddie that Monday night lasted 47 minutes. He didn't sugarcoat it. He laid it out the way he laid everything out clean, sequential, no editorializing until the end. An old man, 71, bad lungs, a dead daughter, a 13-year-old girl who didn't know how thin the ice was beneath her feet, a corporate landlord who'd done this 11 times before and was getting ready to do it a 12th. Big Eddie listened without interrupting, which was how Ghost knew he was taking it seriously. Eddie interrupted everything, meetings, church services, his own sentences. Silence from Eddie meant the gears were turning. How far behind is he? Eddie asked. 3 months at the old rate. The new rate kicks in December 1st. He can't cover it. How much is the gap? About $400 a month between what he gets and what they're asking now. Eddie was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing. No, it's not. And this Mercer, he's done this before. 11 times, different states, always the same. Buy cheap, raise rents, wait for the people who can't fight back to fall down, then redevelop. Another silence. Then Eddie said something that Ghost hadn't expected coming from a man whose default setting was gruff pragmatism. My grandmother lost her apartment in 2009, Eddie said. Landlord pulled the same thing. She was 82. She ended up in my sister's basement for 2 years before she died. A pause. She never recovered. Not from the health stuff, from the shame of it. Ghost didn't say anything. He waited. All right, Eddie said, and what do you need? That was the moment Ghost understood this was going to become something larger than two men talking on the phone. I need information first, Ghost said, and then I need to think. Think fast, Eddie said. December 1st is 12 days away. Ghost already knew that. He'd been counting since the moment Patrice sent him the file. He hung up and sat in the dark of his kitchen for a long time, turning the problem over the way he turned every problem slowly from every angle, looking for the edge that hadn't been tried yet. Vincent Mercer wasn't breakable through normal pressure. Men like him never were. They had lawyers on retainer and accountants who knew exactly how far the law bent before it snapped, and they stayed a careful inch behind that line at all times. You couldn't shame a man who'd built his entire career on doing something shameful and had decided at some point that shame was an acceptable operating cost. What you could do, Ghost had learned this a long time ago, was change the math. Make the cost of continuing higher than the cost of stopping. The question was what currency Mercer understood. And the answer Ghost suspected was the same currency most men like him understood. Other people watching. He went back to the Dusty Fork on Saturday morning. Not his usual day. Donna looked up when he walked in and raised an eyebrow. She'd clocked his pattern months ago, but she didn't comment, just poured his coffee and went back to her business. Leonard wasn't there. Ghost sat at the counter and drank his coffee and thought, and then pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Patrice, who gave him the registered address of Sunrise Estates Mobile Home Parks Management Company, which was a suite in an office building in downtown Tulsa that, according to Google Maps, looked like it employed about 4 people and had an average review of 2 stars. The second call was to Curtis, who told him that a second round of eviction notices had gone out Thursday, not just to Leonard, but to at least a dozen other residents. The third call was to Hal. Tell me about the other residents, Ghost said. What kind of information? Who they are? How long they've been there? Who's vulnerable? Hal, who had spent 30 years as a journalist before retirement and still experienced what he called a Pavlovian response to a good lead, said, "Give me 24 hours. You've got 12, Hal called back in 9. What he had was not just names and ages, though he had those too. What he had were stories, because Hal, when he dug, didn't just pull documents, he talked to people, and people, when someone called and genuinely asked, generally told the truth. There was Margaret Hutchins, 78, who'd lived in the park for 16 years and whose late husband had helped lay the original gravel roads. There was a man named Art Delgado, 66, disabled veteran, who'd been on a fixed VA payment since 2018 and who told Hal unprompted that he'd rather sleep in his truck than ask his kids for money because they had their own problems. There was a woman named Bette Simmons, 81, who had no car, no family within 300 miles, and who Hal said had started crying on the phone within the first 2 minutes of their conversation, not dramatically, just steadily like water finding its level. Ghost listened to all of it. When Hal was done, Ghost said, "How many total residents got notices?" 14 confirmed, probably more who haven't talked. And Mercer's timeline. Management company sent a follow-up letter yesterday. Full eviction proceedings begin in 30 days if payment isn't received. That puts us around Christmas. Christmas. Ghost set his phone down on the table. He thought about Margaret Hutchins and the roads her husband had helped lay. He thought about Art Delgado and his truck. He thought about Bette Simmons crying to a stranger on the phone because the stranger had asked and no one else had. He thought about Leonard Grayson eating half a plate of chicken fried steak while his granddaughter believed everything was fine. He picked his phone back up and called Eddie. "I'm ready to talk," Ghost said. The chapter meeting that Tuesday had 41 men in it. Ghost stood at the front of the room, which was not his usual position. He was, by nature and preference, a man who operated from the edges. But Eddie had told him when he arrived, "You called it, you front it." And Ghost had accepted that without argument because it was right. He laid it out. All of it, Leonard first, because Leonard was the reason he was standing there, and because personal stories move men more than statistics, and because every man in that room had in some corner of his history a version of Leonard, a grandfather, a father, a neighbor, a version of something decent being ground down by something that didn't care. Then he laid out the broader picture. 14 families, 11 prior evictions across 4 states. A man named Vincent Mercer, who had a process and a legal team, and had never once in the course of building his fortune had to look any of his victims in the face. The room was quiet in a way that rooms full of large men are rarely quiet. Then a man named Dirtball, whose actual name was Gerald, a fact known to perhaps 6 living people, raised his hand. "What are we doing about it?" Dirtball said. "Not a challenge, a practical question." "I've got a few ideas," Ghost said, "but I want to hear the room first." What followed was 40 minutes of the most productively chaotic conversation Ghost had participated in since a chapter crisis in 2019 that he wasn't allowed to discuss in any detail. Men who looked like the thing parents warned you about turned out to have extremely specific skill sets and an unexpected level of outrage on behalf of a 71-year-old man none of them had met. A man named Torch, who worked in construction and had done so for 30 years, immediately began talking about code violations and how to identify and report them, because every aging mobile home park had them, and if Mercer's management company hadn't been maintaining the properties, which, given that Leonard had mentioned the heat going out and the power being unreliable, they clearly hadn't been. Then there were levers available. A man named Priest, who, despite the name, was not religious but had a brother-in-law who was a housing attorney in Tulsa, said he could make a call. 3 men who worked regular jobs during the week immediately offered weekends for whatever physical work needed doing at the park, repairs, cleanup, anything that would buy time or demonstrate to residents that someone was paying attention. And Eddie, who had been sitting quietly in the back with his arms crossed, said at the end of it, "And we ride to Mercer's house." The room went still. "Not to threaten," Eddie said in a tone that made clear he was saying this for the record rather than because he felt it needed clarification. "To talk, to make sure he understands that people are watching, that this situation is visible." He looked at Ghost. "Men like that count on invisibility. You take that away sometimes, the math changes." Ghost nodded slowly. When someone asked, "End of the week," Ghost said. "After Priest's brother-in-law has had a chance to make some noise, and after Torch has done a walkthrough and filed whatever needs filing, we go in with standing, not just bikes." There were nods around the room. It was Dirtball who said quietly what everyone else was thinking. Nobody should be wrapping leftovers in napkins for their grandkid. Nobody who worked 42 years. He shook his head. Nobody. And that was the moment the thing became real. Not a meeting, not a plan, something with a spine. Ghost went to see Leonard on Wednesday. He drove his truck, not the bike, because the bike had a specific effect on people, and he wanted this conversation to be quiet. He parked outside the trailer and knocked. The door opened and a girl looked at him. 13 years old, dark hair, pulled back, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and holding a textbook. And she looked at him with an expression that reminded him sharply and unexpectedly of Leonard, that same quality of assessment, quick and careful, the eyes of someone who'd learned early that the world sometimes surprised you and not always pleasantly. "Hi," she said. "Hi, is your grandfather home?" "Who are you?" "Name's Ryder. Your grandfather knows me." She studied him for another second, the vest, the size, the scar, and her expression didn't change, which Ghost found unexpectedly impressive. "Grandpa," she called, not looking away from Ghost. "Someone's here." Leonard appeared behind her, and when he saw Ghost, his expression did something complicated, relief and alarm in approximately equal measure. "Ellie, go finish your homework." "I was finished." "Go start something else." She looked at Ghost one more time, then at her grandfather, and then retreated with the specific dignity of a teenager who is complying under protest. Leonard stepped outside and pulled the door most of the way shut. "You didn't tell me you were coming," he said. "Didn't know until this morning." Ghost looked at him. "How are you doing?" "Fine, automatic, reflexive." "Leonard." The old man exhaled. "I found the letter in my pocket again this morning. I'd been carrying it so long, I forgot it was there." He pressed his lips together. "I called the management company yesterday. Woman on the phone told me the payment deadline was firm. I asked if there was any assistance program, any deferment option. She said, He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. "She said to consult the letter for my options." Ghost looked at him steadily. "My options," Leonard said, "according to the letter, are pay in full or vacate." "That's not going to happen," Ghost said. "You can't promise me." "I'm not promising. I'm telling you what's not going to happen. There's a difference." Ghost kept his voice level. "We have a housing attorney making calls tomorrow. There are code violation filings going in on the park. The heating system alone is worth 3 complaints. And I'm going to go have a conversation with Mercer at the end of this week. Leonard stared at him. A conversation, he repeated. Yes. What kind of conversation? The kind that involves me and 40-odd other people being very present and very clear. Leonard was quiet for a moment. Then Ghost, if this goes wrong, if this makes things worse for the other people in the park, it won't. You don't know that. No, Ghost admitted, but I know Mercer's done this 11 times without anyone making it visible. That ends this week. He met Leonard's eyes. I need you to trust me the same way she trusts you. He'd said that before? In the diner. And it had moved something then, and it moved something now. He could see it in the way Leonard's shoulders shifted, the way the set of his jaw softened by a fraction. She asked me about you this morning, Leonard said quietly. What did she ask? She asked if the man who sent the pancakes was coming back. A pause. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her yes, Ghost said. And then from inside the trailer through the almost closed door, Ellie's voice came clear and unhurried, as though she hadn't been listening at all. I can hear you, you know. Ghost looked at the door. Leonard looked at the door, a beat of silence. Then Ghost said, How long have you been listening? Another beat. Since the pancakes part, Ellie said. Leonard closed his eyes briefly. Ghost felt the corner of his mouth move. Ellie, Leonard said. I'm not going to say anything, she said still. Through the door, her voice carrying that specific quality of a teenager who has decided to be reasonable about something and wants credit for it. A pause, a different quality in the pause. Younger suddenly, less armored. Is it really that bad, Grandpa? Leonard didn't answer right away. Ghost watched the old man stand in the cold outside his own front door, carrying 42 years of labor and 18 months of grief, and 12 days of counting down in the specific weight of a person who has been protecting someone so thoroughly they've forgotten what it feels like to be protected themselves. We're going to be okay, Leonard said. That's not what I asked. The directness of it, the 13-year-old's absolute refusal to accept a deflection hung in the air. Leonard looked at Ghost, a long look, something passing between them that was an acknowledgement, a surrender, a handing over. Then he looked at the door. It's been hard, he said. But I'm not alone anymore, okay? A silence. Okay, Ellie said quietly, and Ghost heard in that one word something he recognized from his own life, the sound of a young person absorbing a hard truth and deciding against everything to keep going. He thought about that on the drive back. He thought about it most of the night. By Thursday morning, Priest's brother-in-law had filed 2 formal complaints with the State Housing Authority and sent a letter to Mercer's management company flagging potential violations of the Oklahoma Residential Landlord and Tenant Act on 7 specific grounds. By Thursday evening, Torch had completed a walkthrough of 6 units and documented heating failures in 4, an electrical issue in 2, and a water pressure problem that he said with professional certainty would not pass a basic inspection. By Friday morning, someone had called the local news. Ghost didn't know who. He had suspicions, how most likely, who still had contacts at 2 stations, and for whom the story of a corporate landlord evicting 14 elderly residents before Christmas was the kind of thing that landed in a specific part of the journalistic conscience that never fully retires. A reporter named Casey Drummond called Ghost on Friday afternoon. He talked to her for 22 minutes, gave her names with permission because he'd called each of the 14 families, by then all of them, and not one of them had said no to being part of the story. He gave her the timeline. He gave her Mercer's history across 4 states. He did not mention what was happening Saturday morning. He didn't need to. Casey Drummond, it turned out, already had a photographer. Saturday morning, 43 motorcycles assembled in the parking lot of a gas station 4 miles from Vincent Mercer's house. Ghost stood at the front. Eddie was beside him. Priest, Torch, Dirtball, men he had ridden beside for years, men whose histories he knew and whose characters he trusted, in the way you only trust people you have seen tested. He looked at them. No aggression, he said, no threats, nothing that gives him a legal argument. We show up. We make clear that this situation is visible. We speak plainly and we let him make a decision. He paused. Questions. Nobody had questions. One more thing, Ghost said. He looked out at the line of bikes and the men on them. Men whose society had decided were frightening men who carried that judgment, like weather, who had learned to use it or ignore it depending on the moment. These people, Leonard, Ellie, Margaret, Art Bet, all of them, they didn't ask for this. They've been quiet because quiet people get left alone, and it turns out quiet people also get walked over. We're going to be loud today. On their behalf. He stopped. That's all. Eddie said nothing. He just put on his helmet. And 43 engines started one after another rolling out onto the road like thunder finding its direction. Vincent Mercer was about to have a very different kind of Saturday, and he didn't know it yet. But he was about to find out what happens when the wrong man eats at the right diner, asks the right question, and decides that half a meal is enough to break a whole broken system wide open. The sound of 43 motorcycles moving together is not something you forget. It's not loud the way a single bike is loud, sharp, and isolating. It's loud the way weather is loud, the way a storm sounds when it's still a mile away, but you already know it's coming for you specifically. It fills the air from every direction at once, and before you see anything, you feel it in your chest, in the place where your heartbeat lives. Mercer's neighbors felt it first. Curtains moved. A woman walking a dog stopped and stood very still. A man washing his car in a driveway turned off his hose and didn't move again. And then the motorcycles came around the corner, 2 by 2, filling the street the way a river fills a channel, not rushing, not aggressive, just inevitable. And they parked one after another along the curb in front of Vincent Mercer's house, engines cutting off in a rolling sequence that ended in a silence that was somehow louder than the noise had been. Ghost was off his bike before the last engine died. He walked to the front door, knocked, waited. Nothing for a long moment, long enough that Ghost wondered whether Mercer had looked out a window, seen what was in his driveway, and decided that being home was a poor strategic choice. Then the door opened. Vincent Mercer was not what Ghost had expected, which was its own kind of information. He'd built a picture from documents and from Hal's file, a certain type of wealthy man, polished and self-assured, the kind who wore his net worth in the cut of his jacket and the quality of his watch. And Mercer had all of that. The jacket, the watch, salt and pepper hair trimmed with the precision of something that cost money, manicured hands, the face of a man who had spent decades being the most powerful person in whatever room he entered. But his eyes were wrong. They weren't afraid exactly, but they were doing rapid calculations, the kind Ghost recognized from men who were used to controlling situations, suddenly finding one they couldn't control by the usual means. "Can I help you?" Mercer said. His voice was steady. Ghost gave him credit for that. "My name is Ryder Callahan," Ghost said. "We need to talk about Sunrise Estates." A fraction of something moved through Mercer's expression. "There and gone. I'd suggest you contact my management company." "I've read your management company's letters," Ghost said. "I'm talking to you." A pause. Mercer looked past Ghost at the bikes, at the men standing beside them. 42 men who were being completely still and completely quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than anything else they could have done. "This is private property," Mercer said. "We're on a public street," Ghost said. "We can stay here as long as we like." Another calculation behind Mercer's eyes. Then he said with the careful tone of a man who has survived business negotiations by never showing what he actually thinks. "What is it you want, Mr. Callahan?" "I want to tell you about Leonard Grayson," Ghost said. "I don't know who. You don't know his name. That's part of the problem." Ghost kept his voice even unhurried. "He worked 42 years in an oil refinery. His lungs gave out. He lives in your park with his 13-year-old granddaughter. Her mother's dead. Her father's gone. Leonard is all she has." He paused, letting that land. "He's been eating half his breakfast twice a week for months so he can wrap the other half in napkins and bring it home to her, because his pension can't cover both food and your new rent." Mercer said nothing. "I want you to tell me," Ghost said, "what number on whatever spreadsheet your company uses is worth that." The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Mercer's jaw tightened. "My company operates within the full framework of Oklahoma landlord-tenant law." "I know," Ghost said. "Your attorney has made sure of that every time, 11 times across 4 states. You know the law the way a man knows exactly where the guardrail is on a road he drives too fast." He took a step closer. Not threatening, just closer. "But the law and what's right aren't always the same thing. You know that too. You've just decided it doesn't matter." "I don't think there are code violations in at least 6 units," Ghost said. "The State Housing Authority received 2 formal complaints Thursday. A housing attorney has already identified 7 potential violations of the Oklahoma Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. A local news team is currently parked 2 blocks away. He let that settle. And we'll be back every week until this is resolved. Mercer looked at him. For the first time, the calculation in his eyes had a different quality. Not fear men like Mercer didn't fear individuals. They feared exposure. They feared the math changing. And Ghost could see watching his face that the math was changing in real time. What exactly are you asking for? Mercer said. Cancel the evictions, Ghost said. All of them. Restore the rents to what they were before your purchase. Fix the heat and the electrical and the water pressure that your maintenance records show have been reported and ignored for 4 months. He paused. That's it. That's what I'm asking. Mercer let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. You're asking me to that's not the financial model for this property depends on. I know what your financial model depends on, Ghost said. I'm asking you to build a different one. One that doesn't depend on Leonard Grayson going hungry so you can make a number work. This is not a negotiation I'm prepared to have on my doorstep, Mercer said. Then let's agree on a time, Ghost said. Monday morning, your office, with your attorney and my attorney and the housing authority representative who is currently, as of this morning, reviewing your portfolio. That landed. Ghost saw it in the small, involuntary stillness that moved through Mercer's body, the name of something he hadn't expected. The housing authority, not just one complaint, a portfolio review. Monday, Mercer said, 9 a.m., a long pause. I'll have my attorney contact you, Mercer said. Good. Ghost held out a card, a plain one, just a number. Mercer took it with the careful neutrality of a man who has decided that neutrality is the only safe play right now. One more thing, Ghost said. Mercer waited. Leonard Grayson said please to a waitress this morning, Ghost said quietly, while he ate half his breakfast. He's been saying please his whole life, to everyone, in every situation. He met Mercer's eyes. Be the kind of man who deserves that. He turned and walked back to his bike. Behind him, he heard Mercer's front door close. And then in the street, Ghost looked at 42 men and gave a small nod. One by one, the engines started again. And 43 motorcycles rolled away from Vincent Mercer's house, back into the Saturday morning, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and a man standing at his window doing math he hadn't expected to be doing. 2 blocks away, Casey Drummond lowered her phone. Her photographer had everything. The video went up at 6 that evening. Ghost didn't watch it go up. He was at the clubhouse eating a sandwich and going over the notes Priest's brother-in-law had sent trying to prepare for Monday. But Eddie came in at 7:15 with his phone and set it in front of Ghost without comment. 40,000 views. Ghost looked at Eddie. It's been up 90 minutes, Eddie said. The footage was from 2 angles. Casey Drummond's photographer had been good patient, had caught the bikes arriving the perfect stillness of 42 men along the curb Ghost at the door. There was no audio from the conversation itself, which Ghost was quietly relieved about, but Casey had recorded a brief segment afterward from across the street that captured him walking back to his bike, and there was something in the way he walked unhurried straight that the comments had apparently decided to have feelings about. He didn't read the comments. He never read comments. That was a rule he'd made years ago and maintained on principle. But Donna called him at 8. I'm reading you the comments, she said without preamble. Donna, there's one from a woman in Arkansas who says, and I quote, my father did this exact same thing his whole life, and I didn't know until after he died. There's one from a veteran in Kentucky who says he started a food drive for seniors in his county an hour ago. There are 17 comments from people saying they've called their own elderly neighbors to check on them. A pause. Ghost. Yeah. There are 4 comments from people who say they recognize Mercer. From other states, from other parks. Another pause. 2 of them say they lost their homes. Ghost was quiet for a moment. How many views now, he said. He heard her check. 53,000. He set his phone down. He thought about what Hal had said that Mercer had done this 11 times. 11 evictions, 4 states. But those were only the ones Hal had found through public records. The ones that made it to documentation. Men like Mercer counted on the fact that each instance happened in its own bubble, that the woman in Arkansas never talked to the family in Kentucky, that the people he displaced were too tired and too ashamed to compare notes. The video had just popped the bubble. Ghost called Hal at 8:30. "I need everything you can find on the other 11, he said. "Way ahead of you," Hal said. "I've already been contacted by 2 local journalists from other states. I've been on the phone for 3 hours. A pause, and Ghost heard something in Hal's voice that he recognized as a man remembering why he got into a profession. "Ghost, some of these stories, some of these people." "I know," Ghost said. "One woman was 91 years old. She died in a FEMA shelter 8 months after Mercer evicted her community in Kansas. Her family says the stress—" Hal stopped. "She'd lived in that community for 31 years. Ghost pressed his lips together. "Get me everything," he said. "Monday morning, I want to walk into that room with a full picture." "You'll have it," Hal said. "I'll be up all night." "Get some sleep, Hal." "Absolutely not," Hal said and hung up. Sunday morning brought something Ghost hadn't anticipated. He was at the gas station near his apartment, filling up when a woman tapped him on the arm. 50s practical jacket, the direct eye contact of someone who has decided to do something and has committed to it fully. "You're the man from the video," she said. Ghost looked at her. "Depends on the video." "The one with the motorcycles." She held out her hand. "My name is Pastor Karen Reeves. I run the First Methodist Church on Chandler. We have a food pantry and an emergency assistance fund." She paused. "I want to help." Ghost shook her hand. "How much is the rent gap for the families in that park?" she asked. He told her. She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm calling the deacons this morning. We can cover 2 families' gap payments for 3 months while this resolves legally. I have contacts at 2 other churches who will cover more." She looked up. "Can you get me a what?" Ghost looked at her for a moment, at the absolute matter-of-fact practicality of her, at the way she held her phone like it was a tool, not a prop. "Yeah," he said, "I can get you a list." She nodded and walked back to her car, already dialing. Ghost watched her go. Then his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. "Is this Ryder Callahan?" A man's voice. Older. Something careful in it. "Who's asking?" "My name is Frank Dassler." A pause. "I'm the man who sold Mercer the park." Ghost went still. The previous owner. The man who'd held Sunrise Estates for 20 years. The man who, according to every record Ghost had seen, had actually answered his phone and fixed things when they broke badly enough. The man who had sold it to someone who did neither. "Mr. Dassler," Ghost said carefully. "I saw the video last night," Dassler said. "My daughter showed me." Another pause, longer this time. "I sold that park because I needed the money. Medical bills. My wife." He stopped. "That's not an excuse. I knew who Mercer was. I knew his reputation." His voice had the quality of a man who has not slept. "I sold it anyway, and I've been trying to tell myself since last night that I didn't have a choice, but—" He stopped again. "Mr. Dassler," Ghost said, "why are you calling me?" "Because I have a lawyer," Dassler said. "And because I signed contracts with Mercer that have provisions I don't think he's honoring. And because I've been thinking since 2 in the morning about a 13-year-old girl eating cold chicken fried steak wrapped in napkins." His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and Ghost heard it. "What do I need to do?" Ghost exhaled slowly. "Monday morning," Ghost said. 9 a.m. You got a pen? Swear. He called Leonard that afternoon. The old man answered on the 3rd ring, and Ghost could hear in the background the sound of a television. Something animated, bright, the kind of thing a 13-year-old might watch on a Sunday. "How are you doing?" Ghost said. "Saw the video," Leonard said. He said it the way a man says something he has strong feelings about and hasn't yet decided how to categorize them. And a long pause. "You didn't tell me you were going to his house." "I told you I was going to have a conversation." "You brought 43 motorcycles." "I didn't think he'd answer the door for one." Another silence. Then something happened that Ghost didn't expect. Leonard laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him. Rusty the way a laugh is when it hasn't been used much, but genuine, real, the laugh of a man who has been carrying something very heavy and has just for one moment set it down. "She watched it," Leonard said, quieter now. "Ellie, she watched it 4 times. She didn't say anything. But the 4th time, he stopped. She cried. She tried to hide. It went into her room, but I could hear her. And I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, so I knocked on her door, and she said she was fine, and I said, okay, and we had dinner. And she was different at dinner. Quieter, but not sad quiet. Something else. She's processing, Ghost said. She asked me if the man on the video was the one who sent the pancakes. What did you tell her? I said yes. A pause. She said, Leonard's voice went careful, precise, the way voices get when they're carrying something fragile. She said, Grandpa, you should have told me it was bad. And I said I didn't want her to worry. And she said, he stopped. What did she say? Ghost asked. The pause lasted long enough that Ghost thought maybe Leonard wasn't going to finish it. And then the old man's voice came back quieter than before, carrying something that Ghost felt in his chest. She said, I've known for a long time. I just didn't want you to know that I knew, because I didn't want you to feel bad about it. Ghost didn't say anything. She's 13 years old, Leonard said. She's been protecting me from knowing that she was protecting me. His voice broke on the last few words cleanly, honestly, the way a man's voice breaks when he has no reason left to hold it together. We've been protecting each other from the same truth this whole time. Ghost stared at the wall of his kitchen. He thought about pride, about the specific, beautiful, devastating way it worked in families, the way people who loved each other could spend months building walls to shield each other from pain, never knowing the person on the other side was building the same wall from the other direction. She sounds like you, Ghost said finally. God help her, Leonard said. But there was something different in his voice now, something lighter. Not better exactly, but lighter. Monday's going to go well, Ghost said. I need you to believe that. I'm trying, Leonard said. Keep trying. After he hung up, Ghost sat for a moment in the quiet of his kitchen. Then he got up, got his notes, and started preparing for Monday morning with the focus of a man who understood that what happened in that room would determine what Leonard Grayson got to eat for breakfast for the rest of his life. Outside somewhere across Tulsa, the video kept spreading. 100,000 views, then 150. Shared in group chats forwarded to sons and daughters with notes that said, this is your grandmother's situation, and this is what they never tell you. And simply from some people, please watch this. The story of a man who ate half his breakfast was no longer quiet. And Vincent Mercer, in whatever room he was sitting in that Sunday night, was finding out what happened when the invisible became visible, when the people who had always counted on no one watching discovered that this time everyone was. Monday morning was coming, and Ghost was ready. Ghost arrived at Mercer's office building at 8:45. He'd worn the vest deliberately. Some people had suggested in the 48 hours since the video that maybe he should present differently for the meeting dress shirt, no patches, something that would read as more conventional in a boardroom setting. Eddie had been the one to say it carefully, and Ghost had listened carefully and then said no. Not out of stubbornness, out of clarity. He was who he was. Leonard knew who he was. The 14 families in that park knew who he was. Walking into that room in a disguise, even a polite one, would be a kind of dishonesty he wasn't willing to perform for Vincent Mercer's comfort. So he wore the vest. Priest's brother-in-law, whose actual name was Daniel Reeves, and who turned out to be a compact, precise man in his 40s who spoke in complete sentences at all times and had the particular calm of someone who had spent 20 years in courtrooms, met Ghost in the lobby. You ready? Daniel said. Been ready since Friday. Ghost said. Daniel looked at him for a moment and then nodded. Mercer's attorney is already upstairs. Name is Caldwell. He's good. He'll try to narrow the scope of the conversation, keep it to the specific code violations, avoid anything that touches the broader eviction pattern. Don't let him. I wasn't planning to. Also, Daniel hesitated slightly. Frank Dassler is here. Ghost looked at him. He actually came. He's been in the lobby since 8:15. He brought his own attorney. Daniel's expression carried something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. He also brought documentation that I think is going to significantly complicate Mercer's morning. Ghost absorbed that. What kind of documentation? The kind that suggests Mercer violated the terms of the purchase agreement within 60 days of closing. Specific provisions about maintaining existing rent structures during a transition period. Daniel paused. Provisions that Mercer's attorney almost certainly believes Frank Dassler forgot about or didn't have records of, or would be too tired and too guilty to pursue. He remembered, Ghost said. He remembered, Daniel confirmed. They rode the elevator up in silence. The conference room was on the 14th floor. Mercer was already seated when they came in at the head of the table, which was a choice that Ghost noted without reacting to. Beside him was Caldwell, who was exactly what Daniel had described, polished, measured, the kind of attorney who had negotiated enough difficult rooms that his resting expression was a carefully calibrated neutrality. Mercer looked at Ghost when he entered. Something moved through his eyes, not quite surprise, but an adjustment, as though he'd spent the weekend telling himself this would be manageable and was now seeing Ghost in person again, recalibrating. Then Dassler came in behind Ghost, and Mercer's expression changed entirely. It was fast there and gone in under a second, but Ghost caught it, the involuntary tightening around the eyes, the fractional shift in posture, the recognition, unmistakable, of something he hadn't expected to be in the room. Dassler sat down across from Mercer without speaking. He was a heavy-set man in his late 60s, with the kind of face that showed its history openly, the lines of someone who'd worked outdoors, worried genuinely, and not slept well recently. He set a manila folder on the table in front of him and put both hands on top of it. Mercer looked at the folder, then at Dassler, then at his attorney. Caldwell was already leaning toward Mercer, speaking quietly. Ghost watched Mercer's face as he listened. The recalibration was happening in real time, faster now, more urgent. Ghost sat down and said nothing. He'd learned that opening moves in rooms like this belonged to the people with the most to explain, and Mercer had more to explain than anyone. "Thank you all for coming," Caldwell said, taking charge the way attorneys do, smoothly filling the space before anyone else could claim it. "I think it's important we establish a clear framework for this conversation. My client is prepared to discuss the specific maintenance issues that have been raised with the State Housing Authority and to outline a remediation timeline." "That's a starting point," Daniel said. "It's not the conversation." Caldwell looked at him. "The conversation, as I understand it, the conversation," Daniel said, "is about 14 eviction notices issued to residents of Sunrise Estates Mobile Home Park following a rent increase that may constitute a violation of the purchase agreement between Mr. Mercer's company and Mr. Dassler." He nodded toward Dassler. "Mr. Dassler would like to speak to that." Caldwell looked at Dassler. "Mr. Dassler is not a party to these proceedings. He's a party to the contract," Daniel said, "which takes precedence." A silence settled over the table. Ghost watched Mercer's jaw tighten. Watched him look at the folder again. Watched him do the calculation that men in his position always did, the one where they weighed what they could control against what had already escaped them. "Frank," Mercer said. His voice had a quality in it Ghost hadn't heard Saturday, something that was almost personal. The voice of a man who has been surprised by someone he'd underestimated. "You didn't need to." "Section 7, paragraph C of our purchase agreement," Dassler said. He opened the folder. His hands were not entirely steady, but his voice was. "You agreed to maintain existing rent structures for a minimum of 18 months post-closing. You raised rents 8 weeks after closing." He slid a document across the table. "That's a breach." Caldwell picked up the document. He read it. His face, to his credit, revealed almost nothing. But Ghost watched his fingers tighten slightly on the page, and that was enough. "Mr. Dassler," Caldwell said carefully, "the language in that provision is subject to interpretation." "My attorney doesn't think so," Dassler said. He nodded at the man beside him who had not yet spoken, and who now simply placed a second document on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Ghost looked at Mercer. Mercer was looking at the documents. His face had the controlled stillness of a man who is angry and has decided for now that showing it would cost him more than containing it. "What is it you want?" Mercer said. He said it to the room, but he was looking at Ghost. Ghost leaned forward slightly. "Same thing I told you Saturday. You're asking me to absorb a significant financial... I'm asking you to not throw 14 families into winter because you made a deal you weren't supposed to make yet." Ghost kept his voice level. "The families, the rents, the repairs. That's what this is about. And if I don't..." Daniel spoke before Ghost could. "Then Mr. Dassler pursues the breach claim, which carries penalties that significantly exceed the projected income from the rent increases. The State Housing Authority continues its portfolio review, which, based on what we found in 6 units in 2 days, is likely to result in fines and mandatory remediation orders. and the 14 families receive legal representation in their individual eviction proceedings, which will extend those proceedings for months. He paused. During which the video, which is currently at 400,000 views, will continue to be the first thing people find when they search your name. 400,000. Ghost hadn't checked since Sunday night. He'd been too busy preparing for this room. He kept his face still, but something in him registered it. 400,000 people who now knew the name Vincent Mercer and the word eviction in the same sentence. Mercer looked at his attorney. Caldwell said nothing, which was Ghost understood its own kind of answer. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Ghost counted. He'd always counted silences in rooms like this because the length of a silence told you more than the words that broke it. 11 seconds. Then Mercer said, "I need a recess." "Take your time," Daniel said. Mercer and Caldwell left the room. Dassler looked at Ghost across the table. He looked exhausted in the way a man looks when he's been carrying guilt for weeks and has finally put it somewhere outside himself and doesn't yet know how he feels about the weight being gone. "How are the families?" Dassler asked. "Scared," Ghost said, "but hanging on." Dassler nodded slowly. "I built that park for 20 years. Knew most of them by name." He stared at the table. "When I sold, I told myself the new owner would maintain it, that I was doing what I had to do." He looked up. "I knew about Mercer's reputation. I told myself the contract provisions would protect them." He paused. "I knew that was a lie before I signed." Ghost looked at him. "Why are you here, Mr. Dassler? Really?" Dassler was quiet for a moment. "My wife died in March," he said. "Cancer. That's why I needed the money. That's why I sold." His voice had a fragility around that sentence that he allowed just briefly. "She would have if she'd seen what happened to those people." He stopped. "She would have told me to fix it. She would have told me on day one." He looked at the folder in front of him. "She would have been right." Ghost said nothing. He didn't need to. The door opened. Mercer came back in. Caldwell was behind him carrying a legal pad with notes on it. Mercer sat down. He didn't look at Dassler. He looked at Ghost, and his expression had changed. In the recess, something had settled in it, the settling that Ghost associated with men who had run out of moves and had decided to stop performing. "All eviction proceedings," Mercer said, "suspended." Ghost waited. "Rents restored to pre-acquisition levels." Mercer said it the way a man says something that costs him money flatly, quickly, without drama. "Maintenance schedules submitted to the Housing Authority within 2 weeks. Heating issues prioritized completed before December 15th. Ghost looked at Daniel. Daniel was already writing. "I'll need that in writing," Ghost said. "Binding, with a penalty clause for non-compliance." Mercer glanced at Caldwell. Caldwell nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Agreed," Mercer said. And that was it. That was the moment, not loud, not dramatic, just a man who had calculated and recalculated and found that the numbers had finally turned against him, saying the words that 14 families needed to hear. Ghost nodded. He didn't smile, didn't extend his hand. He simply nodded with the seriousness the moment deserved, because the moment was serious, not a victory to perform, but a correction that should never have been necessary. Then Dassler spoke. "There's one more thing," he said. Everyone looked at him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a check. He set it on the table. Ghost looked at it, couldn't see the amount from where he was sitting, but Caldwell could, and something flickered through the attorney's neutral expression. "For the 14 families," Dassler said, "back rent past 3 months, so nobody starts from behind when this resolves." He slid it toward Daniel. "It's not enough to make up for what I did. I know that, but it's what I can do." Daniel looked at the check, looked at Ghost, said nothing. Ghost looked at Dassler for a long moment. "Your wife sounds like she was a good woman," Ghost said. Dassler's throat moved. "She was the best person I ever knew." "She'd be glad you're here," Ghost said. And Frank Dassler, 68 years old, who had sold a park he'd built for 20 years to a man he'd known, would hurt the people in it who had spent months telling himself a lie. He'd known was a lie, pressed his lips together and nodded and looked at the table. And the room was quiet with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but was the thing that comes before it. Ghost called Leonard from the parking garage. The old man picked up on the second ring. Ghost could hear that same background sound, the television, the specific ambient warmth of a place where someone is waiting. It's done, Ghost said. Silence. Leonard. I heard you. The old man's voice was thick. I heard you. I need a second. Ghost gave him the second. All of them, Leonard said, not just all 14 families. All of them. Rents back to where they were. Repairs starting this week. Nobody's going anywhere. Another silence. Longer. Ghost. Leonard's voice had broken somewhere in the middle of that second silence, and he was speaking from the other side of it now. I want you to know that I have been my whole life. I have handled things myself. It's not easy for me to, he stopped. Tried again. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you. You don't need to thank me, Ghost said. I do. I need you to hear it. A pause. I need to say it out loud to you where you can hear it. Thank you. Ghost stood in the parking garage in the cold and let it land. He wasn't good at receiving gratitude. He'd never learned how. But he stood still and let Leonard say it and held it the way you hold something that matters. How's Ellie? He said. A sound that was almost a laugh. She's been at school today pretending she's not watching her phone every 5 minutes. A pause. She made me promise to call her the second I heard anything. Call her, Ghost said. I will. A breath. Ghost, when can I'd like to. She wants to meet you properly. She has things she wants to say. He cleared his throat. She's been writing them down. She won't tell me what they are. Ghost thought about the girl in the too big hoodie who'd listened through a half-closed door and known for months what her grandfather was carrying and had said nothing because she didn't want him to feel bad about it. Friday, Ghost said. The diner, all three of us. Yes, she'll want that. Tell her to order the pancakes, Ghost said. He heard Leonard exhale a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries something out with it. Something that had been held for a long time and was only now finally being released. I'll tell her, Leonard said. Mom. The news broke fully Tuesday morning. Not just the original video. The follow-up Mercer's agreement, the suspended evictions, the Dassler check the Housing Authority review that had by then expanded to include 3 other Mercer properties in Oklahoma and Kansas. Casey Drummond had a 12-minute segment that ran on the 6 o'clock news and was picked up by 2 national outlets by 8. Ghost's phone rang 47 times between 7 and noon. He answered 6 of them. 3 were from journalists. 1 was from a nonprofit in Dallas that ran senior housing advocacy programs. 1 was from a state senator's office. And 1 was from Eddie, who said simply, "You good?" And when Ghost said yes, said good, and hung up. The call he didn't answer but listened to the voicemail of twice came from a number with a Kansas area code. A woman's voice, older. She said her name was Dorothy. She said she'd been one of Mercer's tenants in Wichita 3 years ago. She said they'd lost everything, she and her husband, who had since passed. She said she'd seen the video and then the follow-up story and had sat at her kitchen table and cried for an hour. Then she said something that Ghost stood very still to hear. I used to think nobody was paying attention, she said. I used to think people like him counted on people like us being invisible. And we were invisible for so long. Her voice was steady but only just. Thank you for seeing him and for making sure other people saw him too. A pause. I don't know who you are really, but I'm glad you exist. I'm glad you asked that question in that diner. The voicemail ended. Ghost played it once more. Then he set his phone down on the kitchen table and sat with it. He thought about what it meant to be invisible, not because you're not there, but because nobody has decided yet that you're worth looking at. He thought about every Leonard Grayson in every diner in America eating exactly half their breakfast and wrapping the rest in napkins, carrying their pride and their love and their impossible arithmetic of sacrifice and silence, believing that silence was the only option available to them. He thought about a question he'd asked in a diner on a cold November morning, a question he'd almost not asked because it wasn't his business, because the old man clearly wanted his privacy, because getting involved in other people's suffering had a cost, and Ghost had learned that cost personally over years. He'd asked anyway. And the answer had been a 13-year-old girl eating cold chicken fried steak and pancakes she didn't know came from a biker who didn't know her in a whole community of people who had been quietly disappearing without anyone raising their hand to say, stop, wait, look at this, look at these people, they matter. He went to his window. Outside, Tulsa went about its Tuesday business, indifferent and ordinary, and full of people, every single one of them carrying something that the person next to them couldn't see. His phone buzzed. A text from Donna. Just 3 words. Table's ready. Friday. He smiled. The real kind, the one that reached his eyes, the one very few people ever saw. He typed back, "We'll be there." And for the first time in a long time, Friday felt like something worth counting toward. Friday came the way good things sometimes do, quietly without announcement, as though it had been waiting just outside the door and finally decided to come in. Ghost got to the Dusty Fork at 7:55, 5 minutes early, which was unusual for him. He wasn't a man who arrived early to things. He'd been telling himself the whole ride over that it didn't mean anything, that it was just traffic being lighter than expected. And by the time he pulled into the parking lot, he'd stopped pretending and admitted to himself that he'd wanted to be there first. Donna was behind the counter. She looked up when he walked in, and her face did the thing it did when she was feeling something she wasn't going to say out loud, a specific stillness, a warmth behind the eyes. "They're not here yet," she said. "I know. You want coffee? You have to ask." She poured it without another word. Ghost sat at the counter, not his usual corner booth, the counter where Leonard always sat, where this whole thing had started. He wrapped his hands around the mug and looked at the door. He'd been thinking since Tuesday about what Leonard had said on the phone, that Ellie had things she wanted to say to him and had been writing them down. That image had stayed with him, a 13-year-old girl in an oversized hoodie sitting somewhere in that trailer, putting words on paper for a man she'd never properly met, working out what to say and how to say it the way a person does when they understand instinctively that some things deserve to be said right. He didn't know what she'd written. He'd been trying not to imagine it too specifically because imagination in his experience either undersold or oversold the real thing, and he wanted the real thing. The bell above the door wheezed. Ghost looked up. Leonard came in first, holding the door. He was wearing the same flannel jacket. Of course he was. It was the only one he had, but something about the way he was wearing it was different. Straighter. The shoulders that had been curved inward for months were back, not all the way, not like a young man, but enough. Enough to change the whole shape of him. And then Ellie came through the door. She was taller than Ghost had registered from the doorway of the trailer. 13, but tall for it, with her grandfather's same careful eyes and a chin that suggested she'd inherited his stubbornness along with the eye color. She was wearing a blue jacket that actually fit her, which Ghost suspected was new Pastor Karen's assistance fund maybe, or one of the donation drives that had sprung up in the wake of the video. She was carrying a folded piece of paper in her right hand, holding it with the deliberate casualness of someone who doesn't want you to know how important the thing they're holding is to them. She spotted Ghost immediately. He expected her to look away. Kids her age, in his experience, usually found some reason to look at the floor when they were about to do something emotionally significant. But Ellie didn't look away. She walked straight to the counter, sat down 2 stools from him, and looked at him with her grandfather's eyes and said, "You're bigger in person." Ghost looked at her. "You're taller than I expected. Grandpa says I grew 2 inches this year." She glanced at Leonard, who had settled onto the stool between them with the careful movement of a man whose joints had opinions about mornings. "He measures me on the doorframe every birthday. Been doing it since I was 4. Leonard sat down and looked at Ghost with an expression that was simple and complete. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Ghost said. Donna appeared with menus, which was purely ceremonial. Everyone at the counter knew what they were ordering, but she set them down anyway, and Ellie picked hers up and studied it with the focused attention of someone who has not always had the option of choosing. "What's good?" Ellie asked. "Everything," Donna said, "but the pancakes are better than everything." Ellie looked at Ghost. Something in her expression shifted recognition, the connection of a fact she already knew landing in a new context. "You're the one who sent the pancakes," she said, not a question. "Your grandfather told me you liked them." She looked at the menu for a moment, then she set it down. "I'd like the pancakes, please," she told Donna. "Full stack and orange juice, if that's okay." "It's okay," Ghost said. "And whatever Grandpa wants," Ellie added with a firmness that made Leonard blink because it was his voice, his cadence. The way he had always said, "Whatever you need, whatever you want, it's taken care of," coming from her aimed at him, reversing the current of the whole past year. Leonard looked at his granddaughter. "Chicken fried steak," he said. His voice was steady. "Mashed potatoes, black coffee." A pause. "Full order." Donna wrote it down, and Ghost saw her press her lips together and look at the notepad longer than necessary before she turned toward the kitchen. Full order, Ellie repeated quietly. Something passed through her face, fast, private, the way teenagers process emotion when they don't want anyone to see them processing it. Then she put it away and looked at Ghost and said, I wrote some things down, things I wanted to tell you. Can I read them to you? Yeah, Ghost said. You can. She unfolded the paper. It had been folded and unfolded several times. He could see the worn creases, the slight softening of the edges. She'd been carrying it around since she wrote it, rereading it, revising it maybe. He recognized the quality of something that had been handled with repeated, careful attention. She smoothed it against the counter, cleared her throat once, and read, My name is Eleanor Grace Grayson. I'm 13 years old. My grandfather is Leonard Grayson, and he is the best person I know. He taught me how to make biscuits from scratch and how to check the oil in a car and how to shake someone's hand so they know you mean it. He reads out loud when the power goes out because he says stories don't need electricity. He has never once, in the whole time I've lived with him, made me feel like I was a burden. Not once. Even when I knew that things were hard. She paused, breathed, didn't look up. I knew for a long time that we didn't have enough. I could tell by the way he ate when he thought I wasn't looking. By the way he'd say he wasn't hungry when I knew he had to be. By the way he'd check the mail when he thought I was in my room and then put the letters somewhere I wouldn't find them. Another pause. I didn't say anything because I didn't want him to know I knew, because he was working so hard to make sure I didn't have to carry it. And I thought if I pretended not to know I was helping him, I was giving him the one thing he was trying to give me, which was somebody who didn't have to worry. Ghost looked at Leonard. Leonard was looking at the counter. His jaw was working. His coffee cup was in his hands, but he wasn't drinking from it. Ellie kept reading. I don't know why a man I'd never met decided to help us. I don't know what made you sit down next to my grandfather and ask him a question that nobody had asked. But I've been thinking about it every day since the video. And I think it's because you paid attention. You saw him. Not what he looked like or what he was wearing or what he was or wasn't. You just saw him and you decided he was worth paying attention to. She paused. My mom used to say that the most important thing a person can do for another person is just see them. Really see them. She was sick for a long time. She wasn't always able to be there. But when she was there, she really saw you and you remembered it forever. Leonard made a sound, small, controlled. He set his coffee cup down and pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and looked at the wall, and Ghost let him have that. Ellie looked up at Ghost for the first time since she'd started reading. Her eyes were bright. She was not going to cry in front of him. He could see that she'd made that decision and was holding to it with the same iron stubbornness her grandfather used to hold invisible lines across his breakfast plate. I want you to know, she said, and she was off the paper now, speaking directly, that my grandfather is not the kind of man who asks for help. You probably know that already. And I'm not the kind of person who lets people do things for me without saying something. So I'm saying something. She folded the paper carefully. Thank you for seeing him. Thank you for sitting down. Thank you for the pancakes. A breath. And thank you for not making him feel small. A lot of people, when they help, they make you feel small about needing it. You didn't do that. That mattered. Ghost looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Your mom was right about seeing people. Ellie nodded once. She sounds like she raised someone worth seeing, Ghost said. The brightness in Ellie's eyes intensified. One fast blink. Then she picked up her orange juice, which Donna had set down silently during the reading, and took a long drink, and when she set it down, she was composed again, in the way of someone who has used a practical action to buy emotional time. Leonard reached over and put his hand over his granddaughter's hand on the counter. He didn't say anything, he just put his hand there. And Ellie turned her hand over and held his, and the two of them sat like that for a moment, 71 years and 13 years holding on while the diner went about its morning around them. Ghost looked away, studied his coffee. Some moments don't need a witness. I am. The food came. All of it full orders, and Donna had added a small plate of extra butter and 2 kinds of syrup for the pancakes without being asked. Ellie looked at the pancakes the way people look at things they've wanted for a long time, and were starting to believe they might not get. Then she picked up her fork and ate like a kid who was hungry and didn't have to hide it and didn't have to pretend. Like a kid who had figured out sometime in the past 2 weeks that being taken care of didn't have to mean being diminished. Leonard ate his full order. Ghost watched him in his peripheral vision, reach the halfway point of his plate, that invisible line, the one he'd been enforcing for months, and keep going. Past it, without ceremony, without pausing, as though the line had simply stopped existing. Ghost felt something shift in his chest, quiet, significant. He drank his coffee. "Can I ask you something?" Ellie said between bites. "Go ahead," Ghost said. "The other families in the park, are they really okay now? Not just for now, but actually." Ghost considered the question. She deserved a real answer, not a reassuring one. He'd learned enough about her in 20 minutes to know she'd hear the difference. "The evictions are suspended and the agreement is binding," he said. "The rents are back where they were. The heat's being fixed, 2 units already done the rest by December 15th. Frank Dassler's check covered back rent for everyone who was behind." He paused. "It's not permanent protection. Nothing ever is, but it's real and it's right now, and right now is what matters when right now was the problem." Ellie thought about that. What happens to Mercer? Housing Authority is reviewing 3 of his other properties. There may be penalties. There may be legal action from some of the other communities he's done this to. Ghost picked up his mug. "I can't promise you he becomes a different person. Some people don't. But he stops. For now. And sometimes for now turns into for good when the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of stopping." He looked at her. "That's not justice. I know that." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "My mom used to say that perfect justice is for heaven and the rest of us just have to work with the available options." Ghost considered that. She was pretty smart. She was. Ellie looked at her plate. She was also a mess, but she was smart. She said it with the particular matter-of-fact quality of a kid who has processed grief past the stage where it needs protecting and arrived somewhere more honest. "I miss her all the time, but I've got Grandpa, so..." She shrugged in the way of someone who has decided that what they have is enough and means it. Leonard's hand found her shoulder briefly. A squeeze. Gone. Ghost watched the 2 of them and thought about what Ellie had said in her letter, that her mother's gift was making people feel seen. He thought about how that gift had clearly passed down because the girl beside him had, in 10 minutes of reading from a folded piece of paper, made him feel more accurately observed than most people managed in years. "Ellie," he said. She looked up. "That letter. Did you write it yourself? No help." "No help." A hint of something proud in her face. "I wrote it 4 times. First one was too angry. Second one was too sad. Third one was too formal. Grandpa said it sounded like a legal document." She glanced at Leonard. "It did," Leonard confirmed. "Fourth one was right," she said. "I knew when I read it back, and it sounded like me." Ghost nodded slowly. "You should keep writing," he said. She looked at him. "People keep saying that. People are right." A small smile. The first real one he'd seen from her, unguarded without the armor of her grandfather's watchfulness behind it. It changed her whole face, made her look her age, which was 13, which was young enough that the whole idea of her eating cold leftovers wrapped in napkins while she pretended not to know what was happening hit Ghost freshly and with more force than he'd expected. He looked down at his coffee, breathed, refocused. The twist came from where twists always come, from the place you stopped watching because you thought everything was resolved. Ghost's phone buzzed at 8:47. He glanced at it under the counter, edged Hal's name on the screen. He excused himself and stepped to the end of the counter. "What is it?" he said quietly. "Casey Drummond called me this morning," Hal said. His voice had the charged quality of a former journalist who has hit something unexpected. "She's been following the portfolio review. The Housing Authority expanded it like we knew. But Ghost, they found something in the Wichita property. The one from 3 years ago. The one where that woman Dorothy lived." A pause. There were complaints filed at the time. Formal complaints from residents documented code violations records of rent increases that violated that state's tenant protection laws. All of it went to the local housing authority. Another pause longer. "It was buried. The complaints were marked reviewed and closed within 2 weeks. No action taken, no fines issued, no investigation. Ghost was very still. How does a complete file get buried in 2 weeks? That's what Casey is trying to find out, Hal said. But she found a name, a housing official in Wichita who signed off on the closure. Name of Garland. He paused. Ghost. That official accepted a position with Mercer's holding company 14 months after signing those closures. Ghost processed that. 11 evictions, across 4 states. Always clean, always just inside the legal line. A man with attorneys who knew exactly where the guardrail was. Or a man who knew where the guardrail was because he had help moving it. This is bigger than one park, Ghost said. Significantly, Hal said. Casey's going to publish Thursday. She wanted you to know first. Ghost thanked him and hung up. He stood at the end of the counter for a moment. The diner noise went on around him, plates, voices, the coffee maker, the space heater, ordinary and indifferent to the specific weight of what he just heard. He looked down the counter at Leonard and Ellie. Ellie was telling Leonard something, gesturing with her fork, and Leonard was shaking his head in the fond, exhausted way of a man who has given up trying to win arguments with someone who is too much like him. And then Leonard laughed, the same rusty, surprised laugh Ghost had heard on the phone, but fuller now, easier, the laugh of a man who has remembered that laughing is something he does. Ghost walked back and sat down. Everything okay? Leonard asked, reading his face the way old men who have lived hard lives read faces. Getting there, Ghost said. Leonard looked at him for a moment, and something in the old man's expression said he understood that there was more to it, that the thing Ghost was holding was real and complicated and not fully his to share yet, and accepted that without pushing. The specific grace of a man who has spent his life respecting other people's burdens. It's going to get bigger, Ghost said quietly. The story, before it gets quieter. Leonard nodded slowly. You'll handle it. We'll handle it, Ghost said. Leonard looked at him, a long look, and then he reached over, not to shake Ghost's hand, not to clap him on the shoulder, but to do something Ghost hadn't expected, which was to simply put his hand briefly on Ghost's arm, the way an older man touches someone when words have run out and touch has to carry the rest. You should eat your breakfast, Leonard said. It's getting cold. Ghost looked at his plate. He'd barely touched it. He picked up his fork. Ellie pointed at his plate with her own fork. You going to finish that? Ghost looked at her. Yeah, he said. I'm going to finish all of it. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her pancakes. And at that counter in that worn-down diner outside Tulsa, with its wheezing bell and its faithful space heater, 3 people ate full plates of food, not half, not carefully wrapped portions carried home in jacket pockets, full plates together, warm. Outside, the story was still moving. Casey Drummond was writing. The housing authority was reviewing. Dorothy in Kansas was Ghost Hope sleeping a little better. Margaret Hutchins and Art Delgado and Betty Simmons and 11 other families were waking up in homes they weren't losing. The video was somewhere north of 500,000 views and climbing. And Ellie Grayson, who had known for months what her grandfather was carrying and had stayed quiet to protect him from knowing she knew was eating her pancakes like the kid she was supposed to get to be. Ghost drank his coffee. He thought about a question he'd almost not asked, about a stool he could have walked past, about the specific and unpredictable math of paying attention, how one moment of noticing could multiply outward in directions you never see from the beginning. He thought about Leonard at this counter months of Tuesdays and Fridays, alone, disciplined, carrying everything quietly while the world walked past. Not anymore. Some things once seen cannot be made invisible again. Some questions once asked change the shape of what comes after. And some men, big scarred, leather-vested men that strangers cross the street to avoid, carry the softest, most stubborn, most consequential hearts in the room, and will sit down next to someone the world has decided to overlook and say simply, I see you. I'm asking. You don't have to carry this alone. That was what Ghost had done, and it turned out that was everything.